So hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And I just very much want to thank my guests for joining me, Paola and Ray. And I just want to give you both the opportunity to go ahead and introduce yourselves with your title and area of expertise, and then we'll get started. Go ahead, Ray, if you want to start us off.
Hi, my name is Ray and Ray Lamont, and I work for the Salvation Army in Canada and Bermuda. So my role with the Salvation Army there is I'm the National Territorial Modern Slavery, Human Trafficking and Response Coordinator. And then I also provide some coordination for the Caribbean and North America zone and sit on our International Council as the Vice Chair.
Awesome.
Nice to see you here, Ray. And thank you, Patrick, for the invitation. And I'm Paola Carmagnani, and I work for a national organization called the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. It operates the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline. I'm one of the partnership specialists here at the Centre. I've oversee the partnership and the inclusion of and maintenance of the National Referral Directory of services and programs for the hotline, the National Referral Directory as we call it. I've had different roles in the center, and I was previously working for the hotline. So I'm very happy to be here with you today.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I just had one stat here from the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline. You guys have identified 1,500 human trafficking cases since your launch in May 2019. During this time, 2,170 victims and survivors have been supported. So that's just awesome. Shout out there. You're both doing great work, and we appreciate that big time. So I'm Patrick Wells, Director of One by One Canada. One by One's vision is to prevent exploitation of vulnerable people all over the world. We exist to provide urgent care and immediate needs for the vulnerable. We do this through restorative care, educational support, empowering sustainable living. So we're here today to discuss the scourge of human trafficking and modern day slavery right here in Canada. Human trafficking is defined as arranging or facilitating the travel of another person with a view to exploitation, and includes travel within a country, not just across international borders. The forms of modern slavery trafficking victims find themselves in include labor exploitation, sexual exploitation, domestic servitude, and being used for criminal activities. Mm-hmm. Human trafficking is the second largest criminal enterprise in the world. It is an industry worth over $200 billion. While the true scale of human trafficking and modern slavery is unknown, there are an estimated 49.6 million victims trapped in modern day slavery globally. Despite many believing that human trafficking and modern day slavery is predominantly an issue in developing nations, the latest estimate from Global Slavery Index is that there are 69,000 people living in modern day slavery right here in Canada. While the number of police reported human trafficking incidents in Canada have increased 5-fold in the past decade. So Ray, if I could start by asking you a question. Mm-hmm. What does human trafficking look like and right here in Canada? And can you give a typical story as an example?
Yeah, great question. So a lot of the time when I'm talking to people and they're asking, what is human trafficking? They always come to it with this perspective that it is happening over there. So it's not really happening in Canada or North America, but it's happening in some other country, and we have to go there in order to support, help, or see it. But the reality of it is that it is happening all around us in Canada, no matter where you live, whether it's an urban center, whether it's a more rural community, or it's somewhere in between. It is happening all over our country. And the other thing is that it can be happening to anyone and everyone. So it doesn't discriminate, it doesn't pick and choose. Anybody can become a person who experiences human trafficking and exploitation. And so in Canada, we see it happening in a couple of different forms. You've mentioned some of those forms right in the introduction. We see it, one of the ways we see it happening so much, and a lot of people maybe will focus on this the most, is sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. But we know it's not just that. We know it's also labor trafficking and labor exploitation. We see a lot of child trafficking happening. We see it happening through forced and early marriages. through organ trafficking. You know, as consumers, we're buying a whole bunch of stuff. And so we see trafficking and exploitation and slavery happening through supply chains. And we as consumers, we increase that demand by wanting certain things that, you know, might be produced by people who are enslaved or who are being exploited.
Not just a brief glimpse, but those are all active right here in Canada.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you, Ray. Paola, what are some of the key indicators that a person could be in modern day slavery? And if I encounter someone who I think could be a victim, or I myself am a victim, how should I respond?
Well, modern day slavery, which is another term used to refer to human trafficking, right, is a term used by some international organization and very much so also by United Nations institutions, for example. As we said, is a lot of different things. So when we narrow it down, it really depends on the form of exploitation, right? Because the signs will be different according to the form it takes. Now, for sex trafficking specifically, and it is important to know the signs, right? There is no one sign that proves that someone is being trafficked. It is going to be a combination of signs that should raise, you know, the red flag, and, you know, the signs should be read really in conjunction. But for example, we see it very often, a sudden change of behavior or physical appearance, like involvement in a fast-moving relationship. There could be a large age difference, but not necessarily. They could be a financial status or some form of direction. So the relationship is a bit odd. Displaying what looks like a secretive behavior around somebody new in your life. It could be a friend, it could be a boyfriend, an encounter, a new activity, expressing fears or intimidation, sometimes avoiding eye contact, like giving these answers that seems to be a bit robotic or scripted to really what are normal everyday questions. Not being in possession of IDs, not knowing the location, like appearing tired, appearing fatigued. So something is off, and your gut feeling is telling you that.
Right.
So now what to do in those situations? So what to do if you learn someone is being trafficked? So that's a very good question. Well, I would say, like, tell them you believe them, explain that they did not deserve to be treated like that. It's not their fault. It's important to say those words. If it's not an emergent situation, call the human trafficking hotline at 1-833-900-1010 for safety planning tips. They will not call the police unless requested by the caller or if there is an immediate danger. Remember also that they didn't choose to be trafficked, and they may not directly identify as a sex trafficking victim. So don't use that language unless they do. They have been abused, like, by someone, and they may have trauma bonds, right, affecting them directly. And also understand that these situations can be very complex, and living can be difficult to do with issues around, like, control or financial dependence, or this trauma that is still affecting them, or power structures. And also avoiding wanting to or trying to save them or kind of fix the problem or the situation. Rather ask for them, right? Rather ask them what they want you to do. If you're a professional and you work for an organization, perhaps explain your role, explain what your organization can do. If you're not a professional, tell them that they are not alone, that there is hope, there are people out there, there are resources. So ask what you can do to help them right now.
Right. Yeah, that's really good. Thank you. I just want to point out too that all the indicators that a person could be a victim of human trafficking, what to do as a means of reporting and response, can be found on our website as well, onebyone.org. So Paula, another question for you. What industries might trafficking victims in Canada be forced to work in?
Well, as Ray was saying before, really, in Canada, and it's different to other countries, we witness very localized forms of trafficking, domestic forms of exploitation. So when we think about sectors, so among the key sectors we see are the commercial sex industry, there are online forms of exploitation facilitated by technology for the sex trafficking, and a variety of sectors like agriculture, food, caregiving, construction, hospitality sectors, just to name a few, really, for labor exploitation. So sexual exploitation and labor exploitation or labor trafficking are the two most prevalent forms of trafficking that we see in Canada.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Paula. If we could move along to prevention here, I want to mention that One by One have various prevention initiatives across the world, from training medical professionals, teachers, and law enforcement to community conversations. You know, we attack a gateway into trafficking, which is called period poverty, which is one way, through our Dignity Project, where we have taught over 45,000 girls around the world about the dangers of trafficking and provide them with reusable hygiene products to keep them in school and make them less vulnerable from being trafficked. So Ray, if I could ask you a question here, if you could actually talk to me about prevention here in Canada, what it means and what it looks like, and why is it so important for us all, whether a business leader, a church leader, or even a regular Canadian citizen?
So first I want to say, I love this question. I love this question because it's about prevention. And when we're talking about prevention, we're really talking about taking a proactive stance rather than a reactive stance.
Right.
And so I think as we talk about prevention, the first place to start is really understanding what we mean when we say that word, and what we mean when we say that word in partnership with human trafficking and exploitation response work. So this idea of prevention, it's really talking about this act of stopping something from happening or stopping someone from doing something. And then when we connect it to this whole area of human trafficking and exploitation, prevention always involves looking at those underlying root causes. It's looking at those systems, those structures that are not working, that are creating situations of human trafficking and exploitations, that are sustaining situations of human trafficking and exploitation, and then working to change that. I really love that with prevention work, connecting it to human trafficking and exploitation, you're recognizing that some actions can directly prevent human trafficking and exploitation, while others can contribute to disrupting indirect pathways to human trafficking and exploitation. So it's so big, it's so much bigger and has such like a ripple effect, a domino effect in so many ways when we're engaging in prevention. And so prevention work, you kind of using that example, is really about creating those protective, preventative barriers. So it's about addressing those root causes. It's about changing those systems and structures like Paula was just talking about. It's about engaging in actions that really contribute to disrupting those direct and indirect pathways to human trafficking and exploitation. Prevention work is really about reaching people earlier and more often before they get into that situation of human trafficking and exploitation, instead of using all of the resources that we have to be pulling people out of those situations because they're already in it. So prevention is about stopping it from happening. It's about shutting it down so it doesn't happen in people's lives at all. And that's why prevention work is so important. We want to prevent it from ever happening. We want to see people not have to experience it, not be forced or fraud or tricked or deceived into situations, and then have to work towards well-being afterwards and exit. And so part of your question was asking, what could this look like in Canada? And I think it can look a wide variety of ways. And I think we could just do a whole, we could talk forever about this. I think we could talk forever about everything that we're talking about today. But just to kind of give a couple examples, prevention work can be about having programs that strengthen individual knowledge and skills to build resiliency to MSHT victimization and perpetration by promoting the belief in somebody's ability to succeed. You know, instilling that knowledge, those attitudes, you know, helping to build behaviors that can improve healthy outcomes. So it can be skill-based prevention education programs that include things such as identifying abusive behaviors and violent behaviors. You know, what are those signs? What are those methods of recruitment? What are those risk factors? It could be education programs around managing conflict and emotion, safety planning, being financially literate, you know, knowing your rights training. It could also be programs that focus on reducing barriers to exiting exploitative situations. So again, it could be focusing on things like engaging in help-seeking behavior, increasing access to resources and services, and tools that would support them where they're at. So that's one thing, you know, training, providing training to professionals, no matter what the field, what the job, what the responsibility is, you know, people who are attending church, volunteers, everyday Canadians, they need to understand, you know, not only what is human trafficking and exploitation, but what are those risk factors? What are those methods of recruitment? What are those signs? What is grooming and what does that look like? And then how do we support? You know, another kind of prevention is having social, emotional, and behavioral well-being programs for children and youth. You know, and these includes youth who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. And it's really helping them to understand things like how to manage their emotions, developing positive communication and problem-solving skills, building empathy, disrupting harmful practices, learning how to constructively and healthily manage conflict. And then just another example of like a potential prevention activity is promoting social connectivity, being connected. You know, so often we see that when people are socially isolated, it can leave them very vulnerable to situations of human trafficking and exploitation. Because you know, when you're looking for love and connection, when you're looking for acceptance and belonging, where you're looking for friendship and just community, traffickers will exploit that and use that to pull them into those type of situations. So, you know, doing things like having community and school engagement activities that provide opportunities for kids and youth and young adults to develop and practice leadership, to learn how to do good decision making, to learn self-management, and to engage in problem solving and developing those skills is very good prevention work for children, youth, and young adults. Having peer-to-peer support groups where they can build relationships, engage in skill development, achieve goals that they want to achieve goals is you know, part of that social connectiveness. You know, and we were just talking about, you know, temporary foreign workers program. You know, we have a lot of newcomers into our country. We have a lot of people who come as migrant workers, or they immigrate here, or they're refugees. And so providing spaces where they can connect, where they can have community, where they can gain information, and just have support. Again, these are prevention measures.
Right.
So
It's good.
great question. I love prevention is such a great thing.
It's important. Yeah.
So important.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Ray. If I get both of your inputs on this next question, we'll start with you, Paula. What is not working in the Canadian system, or where are the gaps in prevention and protection of victims?
Big question. The Canadian system, I would say, is failing survivor of gender-based violence generally and interpersonal violence. So sex trafficking, for example, sits in a broader spectrum of sexualized violence. Many things don't work. We have what I call islands of excellence here and there, but the big picture is not that rosy. The sector is stretching, chronically underfunded. The emergency and transitional housing that we so need for prevention reasons too is working right now at 300, 400% capacity, if not more. The human trafficking hotline struggles oftentimes and spends hours in order to be able to find a bed for the night for somebody trying to exit their situation. The criminal justice system faces a number of challenges with human trafficking cases. So we have gaps in comprehension, in understanding, in service delivery. But the bottom line is that we have this public emergency in interpersonal violence that is not being adequately addressed. So we need to learn that human trafficking victims' experiences could have been prevented and can be prevented. And without more urgent and collective action, we will continue to fail many women, girls, men, indigenous people. And we know that human trafficking and all forms of gender-based violence are complex issues. But that doesn't mean that action can't be taken. So there are immediate actions that can be taken right away, like upholding the laws, ensuring that the laws are in place, that the institutions who are responsible for protecting the rights holders to be free from violence are actually staffed adequately and have mechanisms to monitor progress against their commitment, ensuring that there is support to the wider society and to community organizations to be looking at this issue from a lens. It's something that can be prevented, that violence is not normal, it's not justified, that everyone has a role to play in taking action, and that these investments need to be made over time in our education system, in our health systems. So really trying to transform society that is grounded on gender inequality to one that is based on tolerance, respect, and non-violence, equality.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Paula. How about you, Ray? What do you feel is not working in the Canadian system, or where are the gaps?
Yeah, I might repeat some of what Paula was saying, because I feel the same. I think one of the biggest areas that we need to start in is supportive housing for people with lived experience, for all forms of human trafficking and exploitation, for women, for men, for boys, girls, people who identify with the LGBTQIA2S+ community. And it was just like Paula was saying, when people exit, it's just not a one-night thing. They need that safe space to stay while they're getting counseling, addiction and mental health supports, while they're training for, different jobs. That housing piece is critical, both exit, short-term, long-term, independent living. And if we can't have that, if they can't have safe, consistent housing support, then what we see happening is some may choose to go back to traffickers and exploiters. Some may be found and return to their trafficker and exploiter, and it has tragic consequences. And so we need a lot more housing supports in all different ways throughout our country. And so that means increase in funding, and increase making that a priority as a country. But I also think within that, not only do we need supportive housing, but we need supportive programming and economic empowerment opportunities. We need supports for mental health and addictions. We need basically support to address those root causes that drive and force and keep people in these situations of human trafficking and exploitation. Because we know that this does not just exist in and of itself. It intersects with so many of these different other issues of homelessness and poverty and violence and gender-based violence. And until we as a country work through those root issues and provide ways to have more funding and create more supports, then it keeps putting them in positions where they're not getting the support that they need. It puts them in and helps create some vulnerabilities in their life, even though they've exited. And we don't want that at all. I think, we need to be really engaging with leadership of Indigenous peoples, people with lived experience, frontline service providers, to really work with federal officials to be looking at the colonial structures and systems that we have in our society in order to really eliminate them, to dismantle them. And so we need those voices, especially Indigenous people, especially people with lived experience, and those that are providing services and support on the front lines.
Yeah, that's good. You know, as we're nearing kind of the end of this panel today, I know we could talk for hours about these topics, and they're very important, vital information here. I want to start talking about sexual exploitation. You know, in Canada, human trafficking, modern slavery takes many different forms, but sexual exploitation is the most detected and encountered form of human trafficking right here in Canada by law enforcement. Over 90% of sexual trafficking victims in Canada come from Canada, and horrifyingly, the average age is only 17 years old, and some as young as 13 years old. You know, Ray, question for you here. What advice could you give to schools and parents, particularly to teenage girls, to help keep our young people safe?
Yeah, this is a great question. You've had a lot of great questions in this session. So I want to start off by saying two things. And I've said this already, you know, when it comes to human trafficking and exploitation, when it comes to sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, it doesn't discriminate when it comes to targeting, grooming, and exploiting young people. And we know that sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, it is a gendered issue, meaning that the majority of people that we see experiencing it are women and girls. But we also know that men and boys do experience sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. So we don't want to exclude them from this conversation. We don't just want to hold this perspective that they're only a part of driving the demand. They do also experience it, but men and boys also do experience all forms of human trafficking and exploitation. And then the second thing I want to say to start this off is we want to start prevention work with our young people as soon as possible, as young as possible in age-appropriate ways. We also want to partner with our young people. We really want to empower them. We want to build in them resiliency so that they are part of their own line of defense. And I want to emphasize part of. We shouldn't expect children to be their sole defense. They're children, they're young, they're still growing and developing. We have a responsibility as adults to stand with our children and to be a big part of their defense.
That's good.
We need to be talking about with our kids, which means we need to know about this and we need to be educated about the signs, the risk factors, the methods of recruitment when it comes to human trafficking and exploitation. We need to understand the grooming process and how that works. We also need to be talking to our kids about informed consent. What does consent mean? We need to talk to them about healthy and unhealthy relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, what's an unhealthy or unhealthy adult relationship, and boundaries. And why are boundaries important? And what does it look like to establish boundaries and then keep those boundaries in their lives? Another thing I would advise, talk about internet safety. So whether it's a house, a school, a church, you know, what are the rules that you have? You know, rules around where the computer is located, which should never be in a bedroom or somewhere hidden. It needs to be out and in an open space where you can see what's going on. You know, what information is safe or unsafe to share online. You know, talking about the need to check their social media platforms and who's requesting friends to be friends or not. You know, talking about computer usage, what does it mean to talk to a stranger online, and the need to put the phones and electronics away at night, not in their bedrooms, but with parents.
Right.
And then the other thing I would suggest to do is talk about pornography safety. And so talk about what are safe and unsafe pictures. And what do those pictures do to us? You know, and when we see pictures that are pornographic, what do? You know, this idea of turn, run, and tell. And again, you can be having these conversations starting with kids very, 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 very young. And you always want to be doing it in age-appropriate ways. And you want to keep having these conversations over and over and over again, because as they're getting older, you want to add more information into it. And you don't just want to have it at once so they think, oh, we've had this conversation, it's not important anymore. These are things you want to be talking about all the time.
Right.
So that's advice I would give.
That's really good. Really good.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you both for your time today and really appreciate your expertise and insight here. And I feel this is so vital, just the prevention and everything we talked about today. It's awesome. I just want to take a minute here and thank the viewer too for watching this, and just appreciate your time as well. And we really want to resource you into the fight against human trafficking. As we covered today, there's many areas you can get involved. We just have to do our due diligence. And yeah, we just want to point you to the website, onebyone.org. We have a Churches Against Trafficking brochure there, which highlights signs, what to look for, how to get involved, how to respond. And we've also covered that today as well. So just again, thank you very much. And if you want anyone from One by One to come to your church or your event to speak, just reach out to us at admin@onebybone.org. And again, thank you both, Paula and Ray, for your time, and everyone for watching. And I just believe this is going to open doors and create awareness right here in Canada. That's not an over there problem. It's a right here problem. And there's stuff that each one of us can do at any level we're at. So thank you.